3 months had passed since the night they almost died in Carol's repair shop. The galaxy had changed, though slowly. The Crethian who had collapsed under the weight of Lyra's shared memories had been captured by the Harbor Network. Under questioning, he had confessed everything about the Nathara massacre and the slave operations that followed. His testimony, combined with data recovered from Crethian ships and trading posts, had been leaked to news organizations across civilized space. The Galactic Council could no longer pretend ignorance. Public outrage from dozens of species forced them to launch an official investigation into the Vex Consortium and its role in the destruction of Nathara. It wasn't justice, not yet. The wheels of galactic politics turned slowly. But for the first time, powerful beings were being held accountable for what they had done to the Velarin. The Harbor Network had used this attention to expand their rescue operations. Humans from Earth and its colonies had joined by the hundreds after seeing the news coverage. They spread across the sector, searching for Velarin survivors in slave markets and hidden camps and forgotten corners of the galaxy. And they found them. Lyra had carried a secret without even knowing it. The small pendant her mother had given her before they were separated contained more than sentimental value. Hidden inside was a data crystal with coded information about Velarin survivors scattered across dozens of worlds. Her mother had been part of a resistance network that had formed in the final days before the massacre, gathering information that might one day help rebuild their people. Using that data, the harbor had located over 300 Velarin refugees in just 3 months. Many were children like Lyra, orphans who had been sold to cruel masters or abandoned in unfamiliar places. Each one was found and freed and brought to a place where they could begin to heal. Danny had played his part in those rescues. He had traveled to 5 different stations and colonies, using his military training and his cargo worker experience to slip in and out of dangerous places. Each time he brought back more survivors. Each time he came home to Lyra, who waited for him with worry in her eyes that turned to joy when she saw him safe. Home. It was strange to use that word again after so many years without one. But Danny had found a home on a small human colony world called New Haven, established specifically as a sanctuary for Velarin refugees. The harbor had purchased land there and built simple homes and schools and community centers. It wasn't much compared to the beauty of lost Nathar, but it was safe. It was peaceful. It was peaceful. It was a place where broken beings could start to become whole again. Carol had recovered from her wound and joined them on New Haven. She ran the colony's security operations now, training volunteers and coordinating with the harbor network. Her gray hair had gotten a little grayer, and she walked with a slight limp from the damage to her side. But her eyes were still sharp and her spirit was still fierce. Danny had stopped running. For the first time since leaving Earth, he had put down roots. He had applied to become Lyra's legal guardian under Earth colonial law, and after weeks of paperwork and interviews, the application had been approved. She was his daughter now. In every way that mattered. Today was a celebration day on New Haven. The colony was hosting a gathering to honor the Velarin who had survived and the humans who had helped them. Representatives from several species had come to show support. Even a few members of the Galactic Council were present, eager to be seen on the right side of history now. Public opinion had shifted. Danny stood at the edge of the gathering area and watched the crowds. Velarin adults and children mixed with humans and other aliens, sharing food and conversation and something that looked like hope. Many of the Velarins still bore visible signs of their trauma. Dull skin and clouded eyes and bodies that flinched at sudden movements. But they were alive. They were free. And slowly, day by day, they were healing. Lyra was in the middle of it all, playing with other Velarin children in a grassy field near the main pavilion. She was laughing. The sound hit Danny somewhere deep in his chest. When he had first met her, he wasn't sure she would ever laugh again. Her skin had regained its natural blue glow over the past months. Her eyes were clear and bright. She had grown taller and stronger with proper food and rest. She looked like a healthy child now, instead of a broken refugee. An elderly, Valoran woman approached Danny. Her name was Sathara, and she had been a teacher on Nethera before the massacre. She was one of the few adult survivors and had become a leader among her people on New Haven. "Danny Cole," Sathara said, her voice soft and musical like all Valoran voices. "Thank you for coming today." "Wouldn't miss it," Danny said. "This is where I belong now." Sathara smiled and looked out at the gathering. "I have watched your people closely these past months. I have tried to understand why you help us. What you gain from spending your time and resources and sometimes your lives for beings who are not your own." "We've talked about this before," Danny said. "Humans just don't like bullies. We see someone getting hurt. We want to help. It's not complicated." "But it is complicated," Sathara said gently. "In all my years of studying other species, I have never encountered anything quite like humans. You are young and chaotic and sometimes cruel to each other. But you also have this quality that I cannot find the right word for in the common tongue." "What quality?" Sathara thought for a moment. "The closest translation would be something like protective fury. When humans see innocence in danger, something awakens in you. A fire that burns away your fear and your selfishness and your desire for safety. You become dangerous in the most beautiful way possible." Danny didn't know how to respond to that. He just watched Lyra playing in the field and thought about the night he had first met her. The way she had crashed into his legs and whispered a single word: "Hide." "There is another thing I want to share with you," Sathara continued. "My people have a word that does not translate well into the common tongue. It is our word for family. But it does not mean blood relations the way most species use the term. What does it mean? It means those who choose to carry your pain with you. Those who see your suffering and refuse to look away. By that definition, you are Lyra's family. And your entire species has shown itself to be family to mine." Sathara bowed her head slightly in the Valoran gesture of deep respect. Then she walked away to join the others, leaving Danny alone with his thoughts. A moment later, Lyra noticed him watching. She ran across the field with the joy and energy of a child who had finally remembered how to be happy. She crashed into his legs just like she had that first night, but this time she was hugging him instead of hiding. "Did you see me playing?" she asked, her face bright with excitement. "I made new friends. They're from a place called Orthani Station. They were rescued last month." "I saw you," Danny said, smiling down at her. "You looked like you were having fun." Lyra nodded eagerly. Then her expression became more serious, and she looked up at him with those clear, dark eyes. "Can I tell you something?" "You can tell me anything." Lyra took a breath and then spoke in perfect, unbroken sentences. Her common tongue had improved dramatically in recent months. She sounded like a different child than the broken girl who could barely whisper her own name. "When I found you in that market, I wasn't hiding. I was choosing. My mother told me that if I ever got lost, I should find a human. She said humans are the only species in the galaxy who will fight for children who aren't their own. She said humans are the ones who don't look away." Danny felt tears burning in his eyes. He knelt down so he was at her level and took her small blue hands in his. "Your mother was a wise woman," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She was right about you," Lyra said simply. "She was right about all of you." She reached up and hugged him tightly. Danny held this small alien girl who had lost everything and somehow found the strength to keep living. He held his daughter, chosen by fate and love instead of blood. And he cried. He cried because his species, for all its flaws and failures and bloody history, still had this one beautiful quality that a dying mother had noticed and remembered and passed on to her child. Humans don't look away. When innocence suffers, humans fight. When the weak need protection, humans stand up. Not always, not perfectly, but often enough and fiercely enough that aliens across the galaxy had learned to seek them out in moments of desperate need. Danny looked up at the sky of New Haven, where transport ships were arriving with more volunteers and more resources and more hope for the future. Somewhere out there, more Valoran survivors were waiting to be found. More children were hiding in shadows, hoping someone would come for them, and humans were coming. Across the stars, in 100 different places, humans were fighting and searching and refusing to give up. Because that was what humans did. That was who they were. The galaxy was dark and cruel and full of monsters. But it also had humans. And sometimes, just sometimes, that was enough to make everything okay. Donnie stood up with Lyra's hand in his and walked toward the gathering. Toward Carol and Sithara and all the others who had chosen to build something good in a broken universe. Toward home. And behind them, invisible but undeniable, the warmth of human compassion spread across the stars like a light that refused to go out. They came just before station morning, when the lights in the corridors were still dim and most of the station was sleeping. Danny heard them first. Heavy footsteps in the corridor outside, moving with the careful rhythm of trained killers who didn't want to be heard. He counted at least 6 sets of feet, maybe more. Carol had barricaded the front of the shop, and they had moved to the back room where there was only one entrance to defend. Lyra was hidden behind a heavy metal workbench in the corner. Carol had given her a small emergency beacon that would call for help if she pressed it. The girl held it in both hands like a prayer. "Remember what I told you," Danny whispered to her. "If things go bad, you press that button and run through the maintenance tunnel behind the wall panel. Don't stop running until you find other humans." Lyra nodded, but her eyes were full of tears. "I don't want you to die for me." "Nobody's dying today," Danny said with more confidence than he felt. "Just stay hidden and stay quiet." The front door exploded inward. Carol opened fire immediately, her shots precise and deadly, even after all her years away from combat. 2 attackers fell before they could clear the entrance. But more came behind them, pushing through the wreckage with weapons raised. Danny counted 8 total. 2 Crethians and 6 hired guns from various species. They wore light armor and carried weapons designed for close combat. This wasn't a capture team. This was a kill squad. The fight was brutal and fast. Carol and Danny used the tight space to their advantage, forcing the attackers to come at them through a narrow doorway where numbers didn't matter as much. Bodies piled up in the entrance as they held their ground, but there were too many. One of the hired guns got through with a lucky shot that caught Carol in the side. She stumbled and fell against a wall, blood spreading across her shirt. Danny pulled her behind cover and kept firing, his pulse pistol growing hot in his hands. 3 attackers were still standing, one of the Crethians and 2 others. They pushed forward with the confidence of beings who knew they were winning. "Give us the girl," the Crethian shouted, his yellow eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Give her to us and we'll let you live. Keep fighting and you die here." Danny's pistol was nearly empty. Carol was bleeding badly and couldn't stand. The situation was hopeless. "Take me instead," Danny said suddenly. "I'll come with you willingly. Just leave the girl and the old woman alone." The Crethian laughed. It was an ugly sound, wet and cruel. "A human? You're worthless to us. Too much trouble to sell, too stubborn to train. We only want the Valoran. She's worth 50 of you. Then you'll have to kill me to get to her. That can be arranged." The Crethian raised his weapon and aimed at Danny's head. Danny prepared himself for the end. He had always known he would die somewhere far from Earth, in some forgotten corner of the galaxy. He just wished he could have saved Lyra first. Then something unexpected happened. Lyra stepped out from behind the workbench. Before Danny could shout at her to hide, she walked toward the Crethian with her small hands raised. Her dark eyes were no longer clouded with fear. They were clear and focused and burning with something that looked like determination. "You want me," she said. "Come and take me." The Crethian grinned and reached for her with one of his 4 arms. The moment his gray skin touched her blue hand, he froze. His yellow eyes went wide, and his mouth fell open in a silent scream. His whole body began to shake like he was being electrocuted. Lyra was sharing something with him, using her empathic gift to push something directly into his mind. Danny watched as the massive Crethian fell to his knees, still locked in contact with the tiny Velaran girl. "Feel it," Lyra whispered. "Feel what I felt when you killed my mother. Feel what every Velaran child has felt since your people burned our world." The Crethian made a choking sound. Tears were streaming down his gray face. His whole body was shaking with sobs that seemed too large for any creature to contain. His 2 companions stood frozen, too shocked to move. After what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds, Lyra released him. The Crethian collapsed on the floor and curled into a ball, still crying. He wasn't a threat anymore. He might never be a threat again, but Lyra had used all her strength for that one attack. She swayed on her feet and started to fall. Danny lunged forward and caught her just before she hit the ground. She weighed almost nothing in his arms. The 2 remaining attackers raised their weapons. Danny had no way to defend himself. He could only shield Lyra with his own body and hope it would be enough. A shot rang out. Then another. Both attackers fell dead with perfect holes in their heads. Danny looked up to see Carol standing against the wall, blood dripping from her wound, her pistol raised in hands that refused to shake. She had saved her last shots for when they mattered most. "Told you," Carol said weakly. "Nobody's dying today." Then she collapsed. The next hour was chaos. The emergency beacon brought harbor members who had been waiting nearby. A team of humans and a few friendly aliens rushed into the shop and took control of the situation. They secured the area, treated Carol's wound, and made sure no more attackers were coming. Danny sat on the floor with Lyra unconscious in his arms. He was bleeding from a dozen small cuts, and his whole body ached with exhaustion. But he couldn't put her down. He held her like she was the most precious thing in the universe because right now, to him, she was. A harbor medic examined Lyra and said she would be okay. Using her empathic abilities so forcefully had drained her, but she just needed rest. Her vital signs were stable. She was going to live. Carol was rushed to a medical facility on the upper levels. The harbor had people there who could be trusted. Her wound was serious, but not fatal. She would recover. As the adrenaline faded and the reality of survival set in, Danny felt himself starting to shake. They had made it. Against impossible odds, they had survived. One of the harbor members, a woman with kind eyes and steady hands, approached Danny with a blanket. She wrapped it around his shoulders and sat down beside him. "You did good," she said. "Both of you. That girl is lucky she found you." Danny looked down at Lyra's peaceful sleeping face. Even unconscious, she seemed to sense his presence. Her small hand was gripping his shirt, like she was afraid he would disappear. "I think I'm the lucky one," Danny said quietly. Hours later, Lyra woke up. Danny was still holding her. He hadn't moved the entire time. She looked up at him with clear dark eyes, the cloudiness finally beginning to fade. She didn't say anything at first. She just reached up and touched his face with her small blue hand, and she showed him something. Through her touch, she shared her memories. He saw her homeworld before the fire. Beautiful forests and crystal lakes and cities that seemed to grow from the earth itself. He felt the love of her parents, the warmth of her grandmother's embrace, the simple happiness of a childhood that had been stolen. Then she showed him something else. She showed him how she saw him. Through her empathic senses, he appeared as a warm light in endless darkness, a beacon of safety in a galaxy full of monsters. He felt what she felt when she was near him: peace, protection. Danny started to cry. He couldn't help it. The tears came from somewhere deep inside him, from a place he had buried under years of loneliness and loss. He cried for Lyra and her family and her entire murdered species. He cried for the galaxy and its casual cruelty. He cried for himself and all the years he had spent running from anything that might make him feel. Lyra sat up and wrapped her thin arms around his neck. She held him while he cried, this tiny broken girl comforting the grown man who had saved her life. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're safe now. We're together. That's all that matters." And somehow, impossibly, Danny believed her. Danny knew he couldn't protect Lyra alone. He needed help from someone he could trust, and there was only one person on this station who fit that description. He waited until the station's artificial night fell again before moving. Traveling through the crowded daytime markets with a Velarin child was too risky. The Krethians would have people watching for her. But at night, with fewer eyes around, they had a better chance. He dressed Lyra in some of his old clothes and wrapped her head in a scarf that covered her blue skin and distinctive features. She looked strange, but not obviously alien. Just a small figure bundled up against the cold, recycled air of the station. They moved through back corridors and maintenance tunnels that Danny had learned during his 2 years here. He had never thought those late-night walks would be useful for anything important. Now they might save a child's life. After an hour of careful travel, they reached the upper districts where the station's more respectable businesses operated. Danny stopped in front of a small shop with a sign that read "Bennett Repairs" in faded letters. The lights inside were dim, but he could see movement through the dusty window. He knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more. An old signal from his military days. The door opened and a woman's face appeared. She was 58 years old, with short gray hair and sharp blue eyes that hadn't lost any of their intensity. A scar ran down her left cheek, a reminder of a battle that happened 15 years ago on a moon Danny had never visited. Carol. Bennett had been his commanding officer in the Earth Defense Corps. She had saved his life twice, and he had saved hers once. When she retired and opened this repair shop on Horizon Point, Danny had followed her here, not because he wanted to work in cargo handling, but because Carol was the closest thing he had to family. "Danny," Carol said, her eyes moving from him to the small figure beside him. "You better come inside and explain why you're bringing trouble to my door." They sat in the back room of the shop while Danny told Carol everything. She listened without interrupting, her face growing more serious with each new detail. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "The Nathara massacre," Carol finally said. "I've heard the rumors. Didn't want to believe they were true." "They're true," Lyra said softly. It was the first time she had spoken since they arrived. "Every bit of it is true." Carol looked at the girl with something that might have been pain in her eyes. Then she sighed and rubbed her face with both hands. "You've always had a talent for finding impossible situations. Danny, this one might be your best work yet." "I couldn't leave her," Danny said simply. "I know you couldn't. That's why I trained you." Carol stood up and walked to a cabinet in the corner of the room. She pulled out a bottle of something brown and poured herself a small glass. "The Galactic Council knows what happened to Nathara. Everyone knows. But the Krethians pay half the Council's salaries through their corporations. Nobody wants to upset the money flow. So they just let it happen? They let an entire species be wiped out and sold into slavery? That's exactly what they're doing." Carol took a long drink and set her glass down hard. "But not everyone is standing by. There's a network, Danny. Humans mostly, with some others mixed in. We've been quietly rescuing Velaran survivors and moving them to safe places outside Krethian reach. Danny leaned forward. A network? How long has this been going on? Since the week after the massacre. A few of us old soldiers couldn't stomach what was happening. We started small, one rescue at a time. Now we've got people on dozens of stations and colonies. We call ourselves the Harbor. Why didn't you tell me? Carol looked at him with something like regret. Because you were finally settling down, finding some peace. I didn't want to drag you back into the fight. She paused and looked at Lyra. Seems like the fight found you anyway. Lyra had been listening silently this whole time. Now she spoke up with a question that surprised both adults. Why do humans help us? What do you get from it? Carol smiled, but it was a sad smile. That's a question a lot of aliens ask. The galaxy runs on trade and profit. Nobody does anything without expecting something in return. She knelt down to look Lyra in the eyes. But humans are strange creatures, little one. We evolved on a dangerous world where we had to work together just to survive. Somewhere along the way, we developed this annoying habit of caring about beings who can't protect themselves. Even when it doesn't make sense. Even when it costs us. My mother said something like that, Lyra whispered. She said humans feel like safe places. Carol nodded. I've heard that from other Velaran we've rescued. Something about how human minds feel to empaths. We're quiet, they say peaceful. Most species in this galaxy have minds that broadcast emotions constantly. It overwhelms you people, especially the children who haven't learned to block it out yet. But humans are different. Our emotions stay inside. When a Velaran child sits next to a human, they finally get a break from all that noise. Danny watched Lyra's face as Carol explained this. The girl was nodding slowly like she understood exactly what Carol was describing. Maybe that was why she had run to him in the market. Not random chance, but instinct. Her mother's advice and her own exhausted empathic senses, leading her to the one type of being who could give her mind some rest. Carol stood up and walked back to her cabinet. This time, she pulled out a communication device that looked far more advanced than anything a small repair shop should have. I'm going to contact the Harbor Network. We need to move the girl somewhere safe, and we need to do it fast. Those Krethians might have lost their tracking signal, but they won't stop looking. What can I do? Danny asked. Stay here tonight. Both of you. My shop has better security than your little closet in the worker blocks. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps. Danny nodded. He looked at Lyra, who was starting to relax for the first time since he had met her. Being around two humans who wanted to protect her seemed to be helping somehow. The gray tone of her skin looked slightly less dull than before, but their moment of peace was interrupted by a chime from Carol's communication device. She looked at the screen, and her expression hardened. We have a problem, she said. The Krethians just sent a message to every communication hub on the station. They're offering a reward for information about a missing Velaran child. 10,000 credits to anyone who reports her location. Danny felt his stomach drop. 10,000 credits was more than most station workers made in a year. People would be watching now. People would be looking. The whole station had just become enemy territory. Then another message arrived. This one was private, sent directly to Danny's personal channel. Carol showed it to him without a word. The message was from the Krethians. It read, We know you have our property. Return the girl and you will be paid well. Refuse and everyone you care about will suffer. Starting with the old woman who runs the repair shop on level 16. You have until station morning to decide. Danny read the message twice. Then he looked at Carol. They know where we are. Carol's face was hard as stone. They must have been watching you longer than we thought. Probably picked up your trail when the tracking implants stopped moving and followed you here. Lyra began to shake. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come to you. I'm putting you both in danger. Danny knelt beside her and took her small hands in his. Don't you ever apologize for surviving. What those people did to you and your family is not your fault. And whatever comes next, we're in this together. Understand? Lyra looked at him with those dark eyes full of fear and something else. Something that might have been hope. Okay, she whispered. Danny stood up and turned to Carol. I'm not giving her up. I don't care what they threaten. Carol was already moving, pulling weapons from hidden compartments around the room. She tossed Danny a pulse pistol, which he caught easily. Didn't think you would, she said. So we fight. The harbor has people nearby who can help, but they won't get here before morning. We need to hold out until then. Danny checked the charge on his pistol and felt something old and familiar awakening inside him. The soldier he thought he had buried years ago. Then we hold out, he said, and they prepared for war. Danny didn't sleep that night. He sat on the floor with his back against the door while Lyra curled up on his bed, wrapped in his jacket and a thin blanket. She slept the way traumatized creatures sleep, twitching and whimpering softly. Trapped in nightmares that wouldn't let her go, he watched her and wondered what he had gotten himself into. When morning came on the station, marked by the artificial lights in the corridor, shifting from dim blue to bright white, Lyra finally woke up. She looked around the small room with confusion before her eyes found Danny. For a moment she seemed surprised that he was still there. You stayed, she said quietly. I stayed, Danny agreed. I'm not going anywhere. But I need you to tell me everything, Lyra. I need to understand what happened so I can help you. Lyra sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around her shoulders like armor. She was quiet for a long time, gathering her thoughts or maybe gathering her courage. Then she began to speak. The Velarin had lived on Nethera for thousands of years. It was a beautiful world covered in forests and lakes and mountains that touched the clouds. The Velarin were peaceful people who had no armies and no weapons. They had something else instead. They were empaths. Lyra explained that her people could feel the emotions of other beings. They could sense joy and pain and fear and love just by being near someone. Some Velarin could even share memories and thoughts through touch. This gift made them perfect mediators and translators. When two species couldn't understand each other, a Velarin could help them feel what the other was feeling. But this gift also made them valuable in darker ways. We make good slaves, Lyra said, her voice flat and empty. Rich people across the galaxy pay a lot of money to own a Velarin. We can sense what our masters want before they ask. We can feel their moods and avoid making them angry. We are perfect servants because we always know what they need. Danny felt sick listening to her. He had known slavery existed in the outer reaches of civilized space. He had just never thought much about it. It was easier not to think about things you couldn't change. Lyra continued her story. 3 months ago, a Crethian corporation called the Vex Consortium arrived on Nethera. They came with trade ships and promises of friendship. They said they wanted to hire Velarin to work as translators and diplomats across the galaxy. Good jobs with good pay. But the Velarin leaders could sense the truth behind the lies. They could feel the greed and cruelty hiding under the friendly words. They said no. The Crethians didn't accept that answer. The ships came the next day, Lyra said. Her voice had become very quiet. Big ships that filled the sky. They started dropping fire on our cities. Everyone was screaming. Everyone was running. My mother grabbed me, and we ran to the forest, but they had soldiers on the ground too. They were catching everyone. She stopped and took a shaky breath. Danny didn't push her. He just waited. My mother hid me in a hollow tree and told me to stay quiet no matter what I heard. Then she went back to look for my father. I heard her screaming a little while later. I heard soldiers laughing. Then I didn't hear her anymore. Danny's hands curled into fists. He wanted to hurt someone. He wanted to find those soldiers and make them pay for what they had done. But that anger was useless right now. Right now, Lyra needed him to be calm. "How did you get here?" he asked. "How did you escape?" Lyra explained that she had stayed hidden for 2 days until hunger forced her to come out. Soldiers found her and put her in a cage with other Velaran children. They were loaded onto a transport ship and taken to a place she didn't know. A market where aliens were sold like animals. She had been sold 3 times in 3 months. Each time she was sold, she was put in a new cage and taken to a new place. She learned to be quiet and invisible. She learned to survive. A week ago, during a transfer between ships at Horizon Point, she saw a chance to run. A door was left open for just a moment. She slipped through and ran into the crowds of the lower market. She had been hiding in the station ever since, stealing food when she could, sleeping in air vents and maintenance tunnels. "Then I saw you," Lyra said. "I felt you." Danny frowned. "What do you mean you felt me?" Lyra looked at him with those dark, clouded eyes. "My people can sense emotions, remember? Most aliens feel like noise to us. Loud and confusing and sometimes painful. But humans are different. You feel like silence. Silence? Not empty silence. Warm silence. Like a quiet room where you can rest. My mother told me about humans before the bad things happened. She said if I was ever lost and scared, I should find a human. She said humans would help me." Danny didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't sure he deserved that kind of trust. He was just a tired cargo worker who had spent the last 6 years running away from his own problems. But before he could respond, Lyra suddenly cried out in pain. She grabbed her shoulder and fell back on the bed, gasping. Danny rushed to her side. "What's wrong? What happened?" "It burns," Lyra whimpered. "They put something inside me when I was caught. It burns sometimes when they get close." Danny felt cold fear spread through his chest. He carefully pulled the jacket away from her shoulder and examined her blue-gray skin. There was a small scar, barely visible, about 2 inches below her collarbone. A tracking implant. He had seen these before. The Krethians used them to keep track of valuable cargo. The device was buried under the skin and sent out a signal that could be traced across an entire station or even an entire planet. Those slavers knew exactly where Lyra was. They had probably known since the moment she ran. They were just waiting for the right time to come get her. Danny stood up and went to his storage locker. He dug through old clothes and spare parts until he found what he was looking for. A small knife with a clean blade. It was his old service knife from his time in the Defense Corps, the only thing he had, kept from those days. He also pulled out a small medical kit. It wasn't much. Some bandages and antiseptic spray and pain patches. It would have to be enough. "Lyra," he said, sitting back down beside her. "That thing in your shoulder is telling them where you are. I need to take it out. It's going to hurt. Do you understand?" Lyra looked at the knife and then at Danny's face. She studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching for something. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it. "Okay," she whispered. "I trust you." Danny applied a pain patch to her shoulder. It wouldn't block all the pain, but it would help. He cleaned the knife with antiseptic and took a deep breath. His hands were steady. They had always been steady when it mattered. He made a small cut over the scar. Lyra whimpered, but didn't scream. Danny worked quickly, probing gently with the tip of the knife until he found the small metal device buried in her flesh. It was barely larger than a grain of rice, but it had been controlling her life for months. He pulled it out and dropped it on the floor. Then he crushed it under his boot. Lyra was crying silently, tears finally falling down her gray cheeks. Danny cleaned her wound and bandaged it carefully. When he was done, He sat beside her and let her lean against him. "Nobody is taking you anywhere," he said quietly. "I promise." It was a promise he had no idea how to keep. But he made it anyway, because some promises are too important to worry about whether you can keep them. Danny Cole was tired. His shift at the cargo docks had lasted 12 hours, and his back hurt from lifting heavy crates all day. He walked through the lower market district of Horizon Point Station, moving past crowds of aliens and humans who were buying and selling everything from food to stolen ship parts. The air smelled strange, like it always did in this part of the station. A mix of cooking smoke, alien sweat, and engine oil filled his nose as he pushed through the busy street. He had lived on this station for 2 years now. Before that, he had spent 4 years jumping from one outpost to another, taking whatever work he could find. Earth felt like a distant memory, a place he had left behind when he joined the Defense Corps at 19. Now he was 34 years old, alone, and far from anything he could call home. The market was loud tonight. Merchants shouted prices in a dozen different languages. A group of tall insect like Varani argued with a short, furry Bexan over the price of engine coolant. 2 human women laughed at a food stall while eating something that looked like purple noodles. Danny ignored all of it. He just wanted to get back to his small room, eat something cheap, and sleep. Then something hit the back of his legs. Danny stumbled forward and turned around, expecting to see a drunk or a pickpocket. Instead, he found a small figure pressing against his back. It was a child. An alien child with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that looked up at him with pure terror. She was shaking so hard that Danny could feel it through his clothes. The girl belonged to a species he recognized, the Valoran. He had seen them before on other stations, always graceful and calm, with skin that seemed to glow with soft light. But this child looked wrong. Her skin was dull and gray, like she had been sick for a long time. Her eyes were clouded with fear and exhaustion. She wore torn clothes that were too big for her thin body. She whispered one word in the common tongue that most species use for trade. Her voice was barely louder than a breath. "Hide." Danny looked up from the child and scanned the crowd. 2 large figures were pushing through the mass of shoppers about 30 meters away. They were Krethians. Danny felt his stomach tighten at the sight of them. Krethians were massive creatures, nearly 2 meters tall, with thick gray skin and yellow eyes that never seemed to blink. They had 4 arms and moved with the slow confidence of predators who knew nothing could stop them. Everyone in the galaxy knew what Krethians really did for a living. They called themselves labor contractors. Everyone else called them slavers. The 2 Krethians were clearly searching for something. Their yellow eyes moved over the crowd with cold focus. One of them spoke into a communication device on his wrist. Danny made his decision without thinking. He pulled off his large work jacket and wrapped it around the girl, covering her blue skin and distinctive features. He picked her up and held her against his chest like she was a tired human child. The jacket hid most of her body. Only her face was visible, and he pressed that against his shoulder. "Close your eyes," he said quietly. "Don't move." The girl obeyed instantly. She went completely still in his arms, like she had done this before. Like she had learned that survival meant becoming invisible. Danny pretended to check his communication device while the Krethians passed by. He kept his eyes on the small screen, acting like he was reading a message. His heart was beating hard in his chest, but he kept his breathing slow and steady. The Krethians walked past him, close enough that he could smell their sour body odor. Their yellow eyes swept over him for just a moment before moving on. They were looking for a small alien girl, not a human man carrying what appeared to be a human child. Danny waited until the Krethians had disappeared into the crowd. Then he waited another 2 minutes just to be safe. Finally, he started walking toward the worker housing blocks on the east side of the station. He walked at a normal pace, not too fast, not too slow. Just another tired worker heading home after a long day. The girl stayed perfectly still the entire time. She didn't make a sound. Danny could feel her heart beating against his chest, fast and desperate like a trapped bird. He reached his housing block and climbed 3 flights of stairs to his small room. It was barely larger than a closet, with just enough space for a bed, a small table, and a food storage unit. But it had a lock on the door, and that was all Danny cared about right now. He closed the door behind him and set the girl down on the bed. She looked up at him with those clouded dark eyes, still wrapped in his oversized jacket. She was so small. Danny guessed she was about 8 years old by human standards, though he knew alien species aged differently. "You're safe now," he said. "At least for tonight. What's your name?" The girl was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice soft and broken like she hadn't used it properly in a long time. "Lyra, Lyra," Danny repeated. "That's a pretty name." "I'm Danny. Can you tell me why those Crethians were chasing you?" Lyra's eyes filled with tears, but they didn't fall. It looked like she had cried so much that her body had forgotten how to produce more tears. She pulled the jacket tighter around her thin shoulders and looked down at her bare feet. "They killed my family," she said. "They killed everyone. My mother, my father, my grandmother, everyone on my world. I am the last." Danny felt something cold settle in his chest. He had heard rumors about what had happened to the Velaran homeworld. Whispers in bars and cargo bays about a beautiful planet called Nethera that had been burned from orbit. He had assumed it was just spacer gossip, the kind of dark stories that people told to pass time during long journeys. But looking at this broken child, he knew the rumors were true. "Why?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Lyra's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because we said no. They wanted to take us away and sell us. Our leaders said no. So they killed everyone who wouldn't go quietly." Danny sat down heavily on the floor across from her. He had seen terrible things in his years among the stars. He had learned to look away, to mind his own business, to keep his head down and survive. Getting involved in other people's problems was a good way to get killed. But he looked at Lyra, at her gray skin and clouded eyes and the way she held herself like she expected to be hurt at any moment. And he knew he couldn't walk away from this. Some part of him that he thought had died years ago refused to let him abandon this child. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Lyra nodded slowly. Danny went to his food storage unit and pulled out the last of his rations. It wasn't much. Some protein bars and dried fruit and a pack of instant soup. He heated the soup and brought it to her along with the other food. Lyra ate like she hadn't seen food in days. She probably hadn't. Danny watched her eat and tried to figure out what to do next. Those Crethians wouldn't stop looking for her. Horizon Point was a big station, but it wasn't big enough to hide forever. He needed help. He needed a plan. For the first time in years, Danny Cole had something to protect Dot, and for the first time in years, he felt like he might actually be alive again.